Well, again, good morning to you. I'm Joel, one of the pastors, and it's good to be with you. A little different today, if you can't tell. I'm sitting in a boat. I'll get to that in a second. Open up to John chapter 6, if you would. John chapter 6, we're going to jump in. I remember it was probably 25, 26 years ago that all of a sudden I'm out at a lake with some friends. This is down in Georgia. And we're there in a John boat, not much different than this. If you don't know a John boat, for you younger people, it doesn't have a motor or anything on the back. And you just jump in, you go fishing, usually you use an oar, and you get where you need to be. I remember being at a lake, and I had a bunch of friends there. There was about 18 or 19 of us probably. And some of us are there in the boat, and all of a sudden what came about was, maybe you've seen those videos where you have like a Mini Cooper, a really small car, and you have a bunch of clowns in them, and they just keep coming out. Well, it was that kind of thing, because all of a sudden they're like, hey, let's see if we can all fit in the boat. And I remember going, why? Like, what's the purpose? Like, anyway, so I get stuck in the middle of this because I was already in the boat, and all of a sudden, before I know it, there's 5 of us in the boat. And the boat, all of a sudden, it went from being a stable boat to where I knew I was safe and secure, to all of a sudden there's 5 of us not as safe and secure. And then they just keep adding and adding and adding. Before long, there's probably 14 or 15 of us in a boat similar to this. Now, let me go ahead and tell you, you can't sit down. I'm like, guys, lay on top of each other, low center of gravity. I was the smart one, if you can't tell. At least that's my version of the story. And I'm like, lay down, low center of gravity, do whatever you have to do. Nobody's listening. And then the next one gets in. The water is starting to come into the boat. I'm like, guys, why are we doing this? And they just keep getting in and keep getting in. And not everybody is even in, and the boat is done, right? It's just that slow lowering to the depth of the abyss, which was like 4 feet below us in the water. But the boat just went away. It was gone. We end up spending probably 30 or 45 minutes with all of us trying to drag it out, and we salvaged the boat. I think that is so many of us when it comes to our faith. We want our faith to provide the stability in life, and it does, right? But also, we have to make sure that our boat is big enough to hold the expanse of what God really intends. I mean, where are we in that journey? And today we're going to have to evaluate in John chapter 6, the 5th miracle that we find in the Gospel of John. Some would say the 5th sign that he's doing. Again, each week I try to run through them, but John chapter 2, you have Jesus turning water into wine in Cana. John chapter 4, you have the healing of an official's son. John chapter 5, you have the healing of a man at the pool of Bethesda. John chapter 6, we covered it last week, the very first sign or miracle, which is when Jesus fed 5,000 men, which would have been well over 10,000 people with just some bread and fish that a young boy had. And now we come to the 5th sign, the 5th miracle in John chapter 6, which is where Jesus all of a sudden is walking on water. Now, a couple of notes for you that you might want to jot down right away. We find this story in other places as well. We find it in both Mark and Matthew. So the very first thing that we see in John chapter 6, it begins with verse 16 through 21. Let me begin by reading through the passage, by reading through the text, and then we're going to come back and unpack it a bit, okay? It says, John chapter 6, 16 and following. It says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. They got into a boat, and they started across the sea to Capernaum. Now, again, I want to make sure you know, leave it up here if you would. In all 3 accounts that we have of this, each time it's following the feeding of the 5,000, which is interesting because the Gospel of John isn't considered to be chronological in all aspects. And yet all 3 accounts that we have of this, it is in the same order, all 3 of them following the feeding of the 5,000. It says, so they got into a boat, started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough, because a strong wind was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. Another passage says they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Let me begin really quickly by going to Mark chapter 6. That's one passage you might want to write down if you don't already know this. Mark chapter 6, 45 through 52 is one of those other parallels that we have of this story. It's that version in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, does speak about the storm stopping. You're going to notice that in the passage here in John, there's no mention of the storm stopping. It just says that Jesus got in the boat and they were at the destination that they were supposed to be at immediately. It just says it happened, right? So it's one of the differences that we see there in Mark. In Matthew chapter 14, 22 through 33 is probably the most detailed. It is the most detailed version that we have of this account and what was happening. It's even in Matthew's where maybe you remember the story where Jesus walked on the water. It's the same thing. And Peter says, "Hey, can I join you?" So Matthew is telling that account. It's an expanded account of all that was unfolding. And what we find there is in Matthew, really, it was Jesus' starting point when it comes to his journey to the cross. He leaves his disciples. He's gone through 3 of the watches. Every sunset to sunrise, there were considered to be 4 watches during the night. And so he's coming back toward the end of that. So he's already started his journey in a way to the cross. He's coming back just before dawn to the people. Even Peter in this story, what we're going to find in the Gospel of Matthew is he struggles with faith. And he speaks and he calls out to them, "Truly, you're the Son of the living God." Truly, you're the Son of God is what we find in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's foreshadowing even the words of the centurion that says the same thing. And Jesus is really starting to paint that picture of letting them know, this is who I am, without fail, without doubt. I am the Son of God. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to Jesus walking on water. Now, I think that's a big question that I might have for each of you to even speak about. Like in your homes, I would like to invite you to have a conversation today. If you're a kid, I'm going to invite you to ask your parents something that may make them a little uncomfortable. So parents, know that I'm being nice by giving you a warning. I'm letting you know. Here's the question. Do you believe in miracles? Do you truly believe in miracles? And you're going, why is he asking that question? That question is incredibly important because Jesus Christ and what he did in conquering death was a miracle of God. Too many people today are living by what they claim to be truth without believing in the fact that it happened. So do you believe in miracles? You need to ask yourself that question. Do you believe in miracles? Do you believe Jesus fed 5,000 men plus all the women and all the children with just a couple of pieces of bread and fish? Do you believe in that? And that not only that, but he fed them in a place where there were plenty. This was the first all-out buffet. He said, give them all as much as they want. Make sure everybody has had their fill. And it still says there were 12 baskets, one for each of the disciples, not knowing what to do with all that was remaining. Do you believe in the power of miracles? Do you believe that Jesus walked on water? Do you believe that Moses called out to God and that he parted the sea? Do you believe in these things? Do you believe Daniel in the lion's den that he called out and trusted in God and God protected him? Do you believe in miracles? Do you believe in the power of God? This is a big question because I'm not here speaking fantasy. I'm here speaking truth. We've got to process that. And if you don't believe in miracles, it's not possible for you to then claim that you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Do you believe in miracles? I want to read out a couple of passages from Psalm for you. The first that you see here, Psalm 89:9. It says that he made, I love this, it says, he made the storm be still, right? We know this very thing. It says that you rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. That's the power of God. Psalm 89:9. That's the power of God. Psalm 107, verse 29 says, he made the storm be still and the waves of the sea were hushed. That's the power of God. You know, so often, I think we miss out on an opportunity for God to transform us. We know here at Chapel Point, right? We're transformed followers of Jesus. That's our vision, to be transformed followers of Jesus. Now, we do that by passionately responding, by being rooted in prayer and the word, by making sure that we equip others to go forth and carry out his message. That's how we do it, but we're transformed followers of Jesus. And so we know that we want to believe in the power of God. And sometimes I think we miss out on greater transformation by not fully recognizing the miracles of God, even when he walked on water. I believe that Jesus walked on water because I believe he also made the very water that he walked on. That he spoke it into existence. That's powerful. How did he walk on water? Well, you know what? You get to kind of do with whatever you want when you're the one who created it. Do you believe in miracles? Do you believe that this story is something that is truly a miracle of God? So what's the purpose of this miracle? The purpose of this miracle of Jesus walking on water when they've already gone out, and it says they've rowed 3 or 4 miles. Think about that. They've rowed 3 or 4 miles. This is a sea because of all of the mountains that would be around it. Wind would come and truly storms would just come up in a moment's notice. We know that. And the wind would start blowing and the waves would come and crash on around them. And so that happened now. It said they had rowed 3 or 4 miles and all of this begins to unfold. So the purpose of the miracle is to show us the power of God and to teach us the need to trust in him. He's communicating in verse 20. John chapter 6, verse 20. He said to them, right? Because this is right after they see Jesus walking on the sea. They see this and they see him coming near the boat. And it says that they were afraid, they were frightened. But he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. In Greek, it's actually the same words of saying, I am. It's the same thing. I am, don't be afraid. Only Jesus can call out and declare the same thing that was declared out in the Old Testament and the same in the New Testament. And we're going to be walking through the 7 I ams of the Gospel of John in the coming couple of months. But all of a sudden he's calling out, I am, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The same language. Here's the theme. Jesus is peace in the storm. The reason that so many of us don't understand that Jesus is peace in the storm is because we don't believe in the miracle of Jesus. He can't help you the same way if you don't actually believe in him and what he did in conquering death and yes, even walking on water. You see, many people today, I believe, actually, when they speak, they actually believe maybe more in the fact that he conquered death than walking on water because that's something that we would love to be able to do, but we can't. We must be very careful not to put Jesus in the same category as us. He is fully divine. And so we have to remember that very thing. Jesus is peace in the storm. And his very purpose, of God's very purpose of giving us his son, Jesus Christ, is to conquer the chaos of the world, the chaos of the storm, to be able to step into that picture. That's what shalom is. That's what the peace of Christ is in our life. That's what God brings when we understand who Jesus is. And so we see that very thing. The disciples see him, the wind's blowing, the sea is crashing around them, the boat's about to sink, they're miles out into the sea, and Jesus comes walking on the sea, and they see him, and he calls out, I am. Do not be afraid. And in the Gospel of John, before we know it, it's just the story's over. It says, for us, I am, do not be afraid. Then they were glad to take him into the boat. Listen to that. Here's verse 21, it's so important. They were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Now again, there's not a word said about the storm stopping like in the other Gospels. There's not a word about the waves going flat or the wind going calm, because that's not the point. The point is that Jesus got into their boat and immediately all was well. Maybe that's the question for you. Do you trust Jesus in the storm? Do you trust Jesus in the storm, and are you welcoming him into your boat? Are you welcoming him into your boat? I mentioned previously in the Gospel of Matthew, in that parallel account, what we find is Peter. And Peter looked at Jesus and says, hey, can I come out to you? And Peter begins well, but all of a sudden he loses sight of what he has really been called to. And we know that Peter began to sink. And so when I ask you the question of, do you trust Jesus in the storm? I'm really asking you whether or not right now, are you sinking or are you still walking on water? Because God has called us to live out a miracle of knowing who he is. A couple of days ago, everybody's crammed up in homes right now. I've never been so grateful to have a little room in my house to spread everybody out in. Right? Everybody's so close together, but we love it and we're blessed. But we like to get out to the different parks and to go for a walk. A couple of days ago, we went to a park and we're walking through the woods and it's beautiful and you can see the picture here. And if you look closely enough, what you find is you can see my son, Bennett. Bennett is 8 years old. He is an awesome young kid, and here he is walking on the top of a rail, probably about 20 feet-ish above the water there. I know, please don't send letters. Some of you are going to think, oh, why would you let your son do this? I'm the one who put him up on there, okay? And so here he is. It's about a 6-inch rail if you look at it. And I literally did my hands. I was, okay, that's about 6 inches. That's easy to walk on. And he was hunched over. He's standing up straighter than straight right now compared to what he was previously when we started walking across it. And he was hunched over and he's holding my hand. I was like, buddy, I will not let you fall. I will not let you fall. I even have him by 2 hands of my own, and I'm like, I will not let you fall. And I said, why are you nervous? I made him stop. I said, if you were on the ground right now, would you not walk across 6 inches, the same thing easy? He goes, yeah. I said, then stop letting your surroundings dictate what you have been called to. And yes, I'm that father. I know. I was with a friend, and he looked at me, he's like, you wear me out. But too many times we allow our surroundings to dictate us, to determine whether or not we're willing to continue walking the journey that God has called us on. What we're walking on has not changed. God's faithfulness that we're holding on to has not changed. The surroundings have changed, but the surroundings around me will never prohibit me from living out the call of God on my life. That's where our families need to stand. I want to encourage you today. Can I encourage you to think about what God has called you to? What rail has he called you to walk on? And are there surroundings in life right now pulling you off of that call or making you more determined to walk it? Because this is a picture that I think is so appropriate for today. That's one of the ways I even speak about it. Often fear is because he got scared, he saw the water, and fear is what sinks our faith more than anything else. I told you about the story before with all the guys getting in the boat and that sunk it. Often it's fear that sinks our boat. It sinks our faith so quick. And our surroundings, please hear this, our surroundings must never control our obedience. can I invite you to just write that down? I know we have something right here, but I want to make sure you hear this. Our surroundings must never control our obedience. And here's what takes place when I say that type of thing, because by the way, it's biblical, is that some of you who don't like that will either be, you'll have your feathers ruffled, or some of you will just ignore it and laugh it off because you would rather laugh it off than change. As a church, our surroundings of this world will never control our obedience to live in faith to God. Amen. So we see this very thing. Now I want to go back again, verse 21. It says, then they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. They were glad to take him into the boat. Have you taken him? Have you allowed Jesus truly into your boat? And have you welcomed him then? You see, a lot of us, what we're doing is we're floating in the sea and there's a storm and we see Jesus off at the distance, but we want to know that he's there, but we still want our own boat. We don't necessarily, right? That's a hard thing to do, to say, God, here, this boat is symbolic of my life. This is my life right now, and this is what I have, and this is what I want, and I want to be able to control the destination of this boat and where it's going, but there's a storm around me, and we want Jesus to be over there and to make sure that everything's okay. But here's the thing, Jesus actually wants in your boat. He wants to come into your boat, and it tells us that they were glad to take him into the boat. Inviting Jesus into your boat means fully trusting Jesus in the storm. There's that quote right here. Inviting Jesus into your boat means fully trusting him in the storm, not only in the absence of the storm. And that's too many of us today, that when a storm blows, we go, where's God? No, God promises to be there in the midst of the storm. He doesn't promise to remove the storm. I often have heard pastors speak to the fact that when you step into the will of God, that everything's going to be better. Now, stepping into the will of God can be scary. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So I think about Job. When Job was running away from God to Tarshish on a boat, it says that he was at the bottom of the boat asleep. When the boat headed back to Nineveh, all of a sudden, a storm came up and he got thrown overboard. And going to Nineveh is what God had desired of him. I think about Jesus. There's nobody who can be more in the will of God than Jesus. And before his death, before his crucifixion, it says that he was in the garden praying to his Father, sweating blood. And so when you invite Jesus into the boat, it doesn't mean that when you live by the will of God that everything is easy, but what it does mean is that you can trust in him to be there and to walk you through the storm. To live by the will of God. Now, I asked earlier if you believed in miracles. Do you believe that God can bring your children back to him? Do you believe that God can bring your grandchildren back to him? Do you believe that God can restore anything? Do you believe that God can redeem anyone from anything at any time? I do. You see, if you believe in miracles, actually you look at life differently than the one who doesn't believe in the power of God. But this is why I ask if you really believe in miracles, because if you continue through the Gospel of John, he then goes into claiming that he is and letting people know he is the bread right? He says in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. What he's saying is whoever believes in me will not hunger. Whoever invites me into their boat and welcomes me will not hunger. That's what he's calling out. In verse 21, he says, I am the bread that came down from heaven. He calls it out in verse 48. I am the bread of life. I'm the only thing that's going to provide you fulfillment, but you have to welcome me with gladness into your boat. Verse 51, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. You don't have to worry about the storms of this life because you're going to have eternity with me. He continues by saying, the bread that I give for life is for the entire world. And he began to call out to everybody who had experienced the feeding of the 5,000, even to the disciples who had seen him walking on water. And he begins to call out, listen, this is the bread that came down from heaven, not like the bread the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. And some of the people, it says that they took offense to this. In fact, it tells us in John chapter 6, verse 66, he says, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. And he turned and looked at the 12 and he says, do you want to go away as well? Do you believe in the power of God? Have you welcomed him into your boat? When I look at this, I want to give you very, very quickly, I think 3 signs that will be apparent in your life if you have welcomed him with gladness into your boat. I'm going to cover these very fast. So if you would just fill in these blanks real quick. 1, 3 signs Jesus is in your boat. Not off over there walking on water even that you can call out to, but you've welcomed him into your boat. 3 signs Jesus is in your boat. 1, gladness comes with Jesus. Gladness comes with Jesus, which means that your spirit is one of joy. You can't believe that you get the call on the name of Jesus Christ. You're overwhelmed by his goodness. You're overwhelmed by how he has blessed you. You're overwhelmed at his grace and his mercy that he allows us to even call upon his name. I believe that calling upon the name of Jesus Christ is something that we're unworthy to do. The mere fact that I get to be in a place and to call out Jesus is Lord is an honor. And so what we find here, then they were glad to take him into the boat. Well, we discovered that gladness comes with Jesus. Second thing is you start to recognize that storms are opportunities. Storms are opportunities. Storms are opportunities to stand apart. I saw some good friends yesterday when I was walking at a different park, just rotating between all the parks in West Michigan. And I saw some friends there, and I was talking about that very thing. Being reminded of, man, after the storm, we're either embarrassed by our fear or proud of our faith. Storms are opportunities for us. Because the entire world will be faced with a storm, but we're set apart by how we respond to that storm by trusting in Jesus, because we've welcomed him into our boat. And then lastly, a sign that you know that Jesus is in your boat. Not only does gladness come with that, not only do you recognize that storms are opportunities, but finally, you recognize that Jesus is the destination. Jesus is the destination. You see, so many of us, here's what's unfolded in life, is that we're in our boat, and we're cruising and we're rowing where we want to go, and we think we know what that destination is to be, and we think that Jesus is here to make sure that we get to the destination that we desire. No! Jesus is the destination. The purpose of the life of a disciple. This is why in John 666, this is why it tells us that some of the disciples, they turned away. They didn't want anything to do with it because they truly believed in his signs and his workings, that Jesus was coming and he was here and he was present to help them to get to where they wanted to already go. That's not the purpose. If you're a sold out follower of Jesus Christ, the purpose of that isn't to say, Jesus, help me to get to where I want to go. The purpose is to say, help me get to you, Jesus. Do you see the difference? Our families aren't to be chasing the same thing we've always strived to be chasing and then saying, Jesus, help us to get there. We should be leading our families to chase Jesus because that's our destination. Our destination isn't making sure we have enough in the bank account when we retire. Our destination isn't making sure that we get the job and the career that we want. Our destination is Jesus. There is none that's greater. Like, that's a wiring. We've got to change the way we're thinking. And the thinking that Jesus is here just to help us to get to our own destination is why the church in America has so little voice today. We will reclaim the voice when they see and they recognize and they hear that we're not asking Jesus to bless us just for our sake, that we're asking to know more of Jesus. What a difference. Jesus is the destination. Will you welcome him with gladness into your boat? And even when the storms come and it begins to rock, you're good because you trust and you're holding tight to the power of the Word of God. Call it out now. Say, I will trust Jesus. Let them know, let your friends know, let your family know that you will hold on so tightly to this because your destination is Jesus Christ and Jesus has already come. And so you welcome him in with gladness. Wow. That's why the wisdom that God gives will show us how to remain faithful. It'll never keep us from being faithful. Because we as a church, we welcome him into the boat with gladness. And we say, have your way, God. Thy will be done. Will you welcome him into your boat? Ask your friend, ask a neighbor, ask a family member. Have you truly welcomed him into your boat? I mean, all the way in, so that now he controls. He's the guy with the rudder. God, may you bless my friends. May you encourage them. May they know your goodness. May you fill them with your grace. And may they have the courage to welcome you into their boat. Amen. Let's worship him together.